Go for it.
Awesome, thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this review of the residential target market analysis that's being brought to you by the Incremental Development Alliance. And today is March 26, 2021. And the purpose of today's meeting is to provide you with a review of the residential market study that has been completed as part of a larger scope of work that's underway by IncDev. So we're not going to dive into the larger scope right now, but when I'm done, we can talk a little bit about next steps. I have two of my colleagues with me today. I have Neil Heller here, and Neil, just kind of raise your hand, give us a wave. Awesome, thank you. And Brian Riley is also here with us today. Thanks, Brian. So when I'm done talking and we start talking about, what next steps, where do we go from here, they will jump in and take over for me. I will probably talk for about 45 minutes or so. And if you're willing to hold most of your questions for the end, unless you think there's something that you really need to jump in and correct me on something, or if you think there's something really important that needs to be said, please, perhaps raise your hand and Sarah can maybe prompt you in. You can also, I believe there should be a chat box function, so you could also add your questions into the chat box. I will not be monitoring the chat box, so Sarah will monitor those. And again, if she sees something important that she needs to interrupt me, we will absolutely do that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It'll just take me just a second here. So again, I'm going to jump to a title page of a report. So on the residential target market analysis, we've provided two documents. One is the main report, and then there's also an appendix. Right now, I'm just showing you the appendix page, and you can see the IncDev logo on this page along with my own firm, which is Land Use USA Urban Strategies. I'm going to walk you through the appendix first, and then I'll take you into the main report and focus on the recommendations and the market potential. There is a table of contents that's the same in both documents. So the main market study, again, will include the market potential. I'll look at households and incomes, housing units and vacancies, home values and rents, income and price brackets, existing choices. So I did a little real estate analysis, and we'll talk about movership rates. I'll probably talk about movership rates earlier rather than later, and then we'll go into the market potential. Before we do that, I want to take you through the appendix, because this is really an introduction of the fundamentals to a target market analysis. So when I talk about, when you talk about this study amongst yourselves, you can certainly refer to it as the housing study, but the formal name is that it's actually a residential target market analysis. It does have an acronym. You can also refer to it as the TMA or the housing TMA. So everybody knows what you're referring to. I want to clarify that a target market analysis is unique from other conventional housing studies in two ways. The first is that it's a study of lifestyle preferences of households. So it goes a little bit further than just studying whether they're renters or owners or what their income is. It does include usually a study of their household preferences for different building formats. In the Incremental Development Alliance nomenclature, that refers to step buildings. So we're going to talk a little bit about step buildings. You might be familiar with things like the urban transect or the missing middle housing kind of typology. And step buildings takes a deeper dive into just building formats, and we're going to talk about some of that as well today. I want to start by saying, there's a second component to the target market analysis. The first component was lifestyle preferences. The second component is migration. So this type of an approach focuses on households that are actually migrating into and within markets, rather than just studying households that are already established within that local market. So in a place like Bellows Falls, which is our subject community for discussion today, you may look at the existing composition of households and renters And if we just, and we could certainly study that, and I've done a little bit of that, but if we stop there, we might be missing a whole nother component to market potential, which is what are the preferences of households that are actually migrating? And this is really important for housing. If we just study households that are already settled in Bellows Falls, we're just going to be studying a lot, many of them are owners that are already very settled into their houses and very disinclined to move, especially if they're owners. By looking at migration, we're going to be looking at doing a study that's actually focused more on the lifestyle preferences of households that are actually on the move and looking for new housing choices. In order to do that, I rely on a data set that I purchased from Experian. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, hopefully, it just says Experian up here. That is one of 3 companies that does provide households with credit score reports. So that's just one service that they provide. They also capture a lot of data on consumer behavior data on how individual households handle money, how they handle property, where they live, and then lots of socioeconomics. So in addition to being able to provide you with your credit score for yourself and your household, they also capture all that data and they use it to create 71 lifestyle clusters. Here they are kind of scattered. I know you can't see this, but we're going to dive into this. You will be able to see it in a little bit. Here are all 71. Kind of created in a patchwork pattern with families scattered by families in one corner, singles in another. Think of it as a y-axis here and an x-axis there. And then whether you're mature or young and high income versus low income. And I have other charts where I've done this. I've actually shown whether they tend to live in an urban place or a rural place, whether they choose detached houses versus attached houses, whether they're renters versus owners, and whether they would choose a townhouse over a loft. So there's lots of ways to study the data. And when you look at it this way, it kind of looks like a patchwork or a mosaic. So Experian actually refers to the data as mosaics. You may be familiar with other sources like Nielsen, Claritas, that provides things like prisms. There's another vendor that provides tapestries. You kind of get the idea. There's 71 of them in the mosaic data set. This chart is in, this table is in the appendix. And I'm going to see if I can move this a little bit so that I can zoom in. It's hard to see when I show the whole thing, but it's easy to zoom in. So if you happen to be looking at this on your own screen, you can really zoom in and study these, just kind of a snapshot on each of these lifestyle clusters. There's only a snapshot here. The data that I have on each of these lifestyle clusters is actually 20 pages long. So I'm able to filter through that 20 pages of data and pull out what I think is most important to the housing industry and to the housing market. So on the lowest number clusters, like clusters 1 here, American Royalty, they are the richest of the rich. They're number 1. High income and mature, 2 wage earners, their children are growing up, that kind of thing. That's at the top of the list. I'm going to go all the way to the other end of the chart here. I'm scrolling down to the bottom of the list where we get into Dare to Dream, 66 out of 71. We're starting, here's 67, 68, 70, 71. So 71 is the poorest of the poor. They rank on the lowest on income in general, and they have incomes of less than $15,000 per household. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're young. But here's a next one up, Type Money, 15,000 or less. And again, they're not necessarily just young folks, but many of them are middle-aged, really. Small town, shallow pockets, more likely to be couples. So each group is diverse and very different. I want to show you that through the 20 pages of data that I gather that is available from Experian, I'm actually able to pull out certain variables that are relevant to the housing market. For example, this is just one of the clusters. It's number 54 on income. They're striving singles. They do tend to be younger. They're early in their careers, and they are definitely career driven, and they work hard working. Yet they tend to be singles, of course, and they tend to have one wage earner in the household, which really limits their ability to buy a house. So 96% of them are renters, and I can see that in the upper right-hand corner. Of those renters, almost all of them move every year. This number is really dark to see. If I look at it, it's actually 84% of this household moves nationwide. So if you read this title here, these are national averages. Of the few owners, only 4% of them are owners, and of them, 1 in 4 moves every year. These are really high movership rates. I can tell you that nationwide, on average, only 6% of all owners across the nation move every year. So for the striving singles, we're moving 4 times as frequently. Nationwide, renters move 30% of all renters move in any given year. So for striving singles to be at 84%, they're moving 3 times as often. Because of that, they tend to generate a lot of market potential because they're on the move. They have high movership rates. When they do move, we know that 70% will choose a larger city and 25% will choose a smaller city. And half of them will choose a larger building. Even if you gave them houses to rent, they would still choose larger buildings. Every lifestyle cluster has a different profile. Here's the Bohemian Groove. These are all renters that I'm going to walk you through here real quick. Starting at the most affluent renters are the Bohemian Groove at K40. And striving singles, where I was, family troopers, senior discounts, daring to dream. So the daring to dream, they're lower in income. Almost all of them are renters. Half of those renters move every year. Half of them go to large cities, and 60% of them will choose a house. They're renting houses. So with that data, I'm able to roll it up and actually run a model to figure out who's living in Bellows Falls, who's migrating into the village, and what is their lifestyle preference based on those sheets. And with that, I can determine, I can do mathematically, I can figure out and compute what their inclination is to choose different building sizes. And then we can translate that into what is an appropriate building format for this unique place. So one of the things that I do is I start off with a lifestyle cluster report. And I'm going to find, I actually ran the report for Rockingham, the town of Rockingham, which is the larger geography. And it is a 2-page report. So the first half of the list of lifestyle clusters I can fit on 1 page, and then I have to fit the second half on a 2nd page. And again, the most affluent is number 1, American Royalty, and the poorest of the poor is 71, Tough Times. In Rockingham, I can see right away that 104 households in Rockingham are unspoiled splendor, 115 are settled and sensible, and 225 are Bohemian Groove. The next one is actually, oh, I thought I had Bellows Falls. Here's Bellows Falls, which is really going to be the focus of most of the work that I did on this housing study, is really for Bellows Falls. So again, this is the most affluent half, and I can see that you have 56 households that are blue collar comfort and 110 settled and sensible, 17 no place like home. Knowing these groups, having worked with them so much, I know that almost all of them are home buyers, and almost all of them will buy a house rather than buying a townhouse or a loft or a condo. You might think of them as condos. I tend to say townhouses, interchangeable. A condo is a form of ownership. A townhouse is a building format. If I go to the more moderate half, I can see that we have 205 Bohemian Grooves, 150 Rooted Flower Power, 100 digital dependents. On the striving singles, you only have 6. And remember, striving single, as I said before, they have really high movership rates, and yet you have really just 6 of them. There's another group here that we talked about when we did a preview. It was called Family Fantastic. I'm going to highlight B9 here, number 9 in affluence, 9th after the richest of the rich. So they're pretty affluent. They have pretty deep pockets. And you have 6 of those households. Family Fantastic, just again, knowing them, they love to have, they are families. They're very mobile, they're on the move, and they tend to go to places that have lots of recreational opportunities, lots of state parks, racetracks, water, places for water recreation. So they love boating, they love snowmobiling, off-road vehicles, you name it. And they have a lot of toys. So that means when they buy a house, they love to have a 2-car garage, and if they can have a shed in the back for all their toys, that's even better. You have 6. We ran the model for not just Bellows, I'm sorry, we didn't run the model for all these other places, but we did run some demographics for other places in the region. So along the Connecticut River in particular, and north to south. All of the data in this report is organized north to south when you see it for these other places. So White River Junction is always shown first, then Claremont, Springfield, Bellows Falls, Rockingham, the town, Walpole, Brattleboro, and then out to Bennington, and then down to Holyoke. So remember, I'm jumping around a little bit, and I thank you for your patience in doing that. Remember, I said that there were 6 Family Fantastic in Bellows Falls. I can go quickly to White River Junction and highlight that in White River Junction, there's actually 98. So this is the sort of thing that flags a lifestyle cluster and changes it from being a lifestyle cluster to being a target market. So you could say, well, that's an interesting lifestyle cluster. They're in White River Junction. They're not in Bellows Falls, so perhaps they're a target market for us. And then I would say, yes, so what do we need to do in Bellows Falls if we want to compete with White River Junction for that particular target market? There's others like Striving Singles. They have 15, and I think you had 6. So, they have twice as many, maybe 3 times as many as you do, but it's not real profound. It's not a big spread. It's really this one group, Family Fantastic, that really kind of stood out. And we talked about that a little bit. I will encourage you individually to study these sheets between the different markets on your own and at your own leisure, and try to deduce similar types of patterns. Look for patterns like that. You're going to know some of these markets and maybe not others as well. But if you know Claremont, you can compare them. I like to actually take these sheets and kind of spread them out on the kitchen table and just try to look for patterns and look for comparisons. I'm able to take all that data. I've run it through a model for you to identify what the market potential is. And I have identified the target markets that are the most apparent for Bellows Falls today. When I do the market potential, I'm running it on the year 2020. And I'm actually doing forecasts for you for 2025. So another way to think of it is that the data is good for 5 years, about 5 years. 5 years from now, if you do a lot of things in Bellows Falls that helps you compete with White River Junction, then we could start saying, okay, we could do a better job of intercepting lifestyle clusters that are currently bypassing you because for whatever reason, maybe you just don't quite offer what they're looking for. I'm going to jump to the main report now. So in this main report, it says the draft market study has the March 23rd date on it. There is a narrative. It's really a technical narrative. It's intended to really guide you through the exhibits, particularly exhibits in sections A, B, and C. actually mostly A and B, to be honest. It's really, so that I kind of build this market study like layers of a cake, right? So that the bottom layers are kind of the market parameters, the foundation holding up the rest of the analysis. And then I step into movership rates, and then I do some additional work. I come to the conclusions of the market potential, and I actually report that first. So you don't have to dig to the back of the report to find the conclusions. The conclusions are actually in sections A and B. Before I dive into the conclusions too much, I do want to talk about movership rates. So again, I showed you earlier that the striving singles alone, you know, that a quarter of the owners move every year and 84% of the renters move. This is a roll up of averages for each of the places in the study area, and for the state of Vermont, and for Windham County. So here are the owners all rolled up together, including the striving singles and all of the other lifestyle clusters weighted in. And Bellows Falls right now, only 2% of your existing owners moved into or within the village of Bellows Falls last year. Only 2%. This includes households that moved into Bellows Falls or that already lived in the village and just shuffled within the market. 2% is pretty low. Again, the national average is 6%. Vermont is at 7%. Windham is at 5%. So they're pretty close to the national average. To have a 2% is a flag for me that says there's something going on in Bellows Falls, that only 2% of your owners moved last year. Usually when I see that, and again, I don't know Bellows Falls nearly as well as you guys do. So, and I'm recognizing that, but I'm just pointing out how my brain starts to think when I see data like this. I conclude that either it's not an attractive market, so you're just not attracting a lot of owners, and that could be. It could be that there's not a lot of choices available. So if the market's really tight, if there are no houses available to buy, then no one can move into the market. Maybe it's a bit of both. It's an absence of supply and an absence of appeal. It's tough to tell. Another thing that can happen in markets is if the supply is low and the prices are high, we're disinclined to move. There's a disinclination of move when prices are high and the supply is low. What we tend to do as human beings is we tend to say, I'm going to stay put. I've already got a decent mortgage. I've got a low interest rate. I'm happy in my home. My home value is going up. I probably couldn't afford it today if I had to buy it, but I bought it 10 years ago and I'm staying put so I don't move. So there's not a lot of movership. Let's look at the renters. And again, remember I said nationwide, the average for renters to move is 30%. In Vermont, it's 27%. Windham, you're at 26%. So you can get a sense of perspective real quickly. This is pretty typical. I mean, I don't see real big anomalies in here, but I do see an anomaly here, again, with the renters. Something is keeping the renters from moving. I can share with you, I was just doing a presentation like this morning in another market where 40% of the renters were moving. They had a surplus of supply, the rents were really low, and the renters could be choosy. So they moved every year. All the renters shuffled, and they're all trying to jockey for the best units. And there's lots of choice, lots of low prices. Everybody's shuffling. So the opposite is happening somehow in Bellows Falls. So I have a couple of maps in here, just kind of clarifying. We're focused on Bellows Falls, in Rockingham, in Windham, in Vermont, and here are our other markets. So that's an important part of this. There is a lot, the movership rates are an important part of understanding why the market potential is generally high for renters and not as high for owners. There is a lot of additional information in here that I will come back to if we have time. So for example, there's charts in here showing income brackets and comparing that with value brackets for owners. Always read the title first as you're browsing this information. I always say, just really carefully read the title, that you're looking at owners and not renters, and that you know which market you're in, and try to read take a pause for a few seconds and just read that second row. Then read the x-axis next, and then the y-axis. Check the title in the chart before you try to read the data. So always read your title, x-axis, y-axis, title, and then the data in that order. So what I'm looking for here is just kind of a pattern to see whether there's usually nationwide, we would see a bell curve in here. Well, this is kind of a skewed bell curve. The owners have incomes in here. The values are skewed in the opposite direction. It tells me that there's really a need probably to build more detached owner-occupied houses that would meet the expectations of these relatively affluent households, because they probably can't find what they're looking for today. We can do the same thing the light blue here is Rockingham, and the gray here is Windham County. And then I also ran it for renters. So here is the renter profile. It's a little more similar, where the renters have lower incomes, and then the contract rents of existing units are kind of loaded in here. There still may be a market potential. I look at these renters and go, okay, well, they have pretty deep pockets. They're renters, but there aren't a lot of choices. So it tells me again that there's probably room in the market to build some for-lease lofts that are brand new that would appeal to some of those target markets. There is a narrative report in here as well. Again, it's 13 pages, and it's pretty much a technical guide on how to read the exhibits. I'm going to jump to these summary charts in section B before I dive into section A. And I'm going to zoom in on this because I want to focus on some of these charts. So the two charts at the top of the page I'm going to focus on. It's the same data set on both charts. So the way to read this again is to always start with the title. It's annual, means it's a 1-year snapshot. It is the market potential, which means this isn't the profile of existing households. This is the profile of what the market potential is. It is for the village of Bellows Falls. I do qualify this by saying this is a good measure of new builds only. I had one question that came up. Does that mean that all new residents are going to buy new builds and that all existing residents would go into rehabs? Not at all. That's not what it's intended to be. All it is that I know from the model that you have 10 homeowners that could potentially migrate into the village of Bellows Falls each year through the year 2025. 10 a year, every year for the next 5 years, or next 4 years, or a little beyond. And I'm just saying, concluding that that's a really good measure, because they're brand new households. It's a good measure of how many new builds the market could support. We do recognize that actually, if you built 10 new houses, 5 of them could actually be snapped up by existing residents, which means 10 of the new owners, of the 10 new owners, 5 of them are going to have to find something that was pre-owned. So there's always a little bit of trading, and I'm not going to perfectly be able to measure, exactly. I can't exactly line up how many of your new residents are going to buy new builds and how many will buy a rehabbed house. And I can't perfectly measure how many of your existing residents would choose a new house if you built it and take one away from one of the new residents, so that a new resident has to actually buy a rehabbed unit. It's okay, that shuffling can happen, but just understand that the 10 is the way to read this, is that there are 10 new owners migrating into the village every year, inclined to buy a house. And I'm saying that that's a good conclusion to say you should build at least 10 new houses every year just to make sure that we have enough to accommodate them. And the same is true for the renters, but again, you're going to see this number much higher for renters. First of all, I already know that more than 50% of your existing households are renters. So that already pushes the number up. And renters move 3 times as often as owners do. So and renters are migrating, wanting to migrate into Bellows Falls. I know that they're migrating into Windham County. I know that they're migrating into Rockingham, the town of Rockingham. And because of that, I'm able to make a cut and say Bellows Falls ought to get a certain share of that. And that means that you would get 75 new renters every year through 2025. That means we should build 75 new units to accommodate them, even if some of them rent other pre-existing units, and maybe existing households, existing renters might snap up some of the new units. That's okay. That trade-off can happen, but we should at least build 75 every year. I'm not trying to account in these numbers at all how much land you have as available space to build new units. I'm only showing you what the market potential is based on demand. So the question is, and we can talk about this a little bit later, and have Brian and Neil pitch in a little bit later and talk about where could that potentially go. I do have recommendations in the report that talk about a little bit about location strategies. In general, we tend to emphasize the importance of walkable downtown places, in urban infill and established neighborhoods, looking for mixed opportunities to build mixed-use projects or to diversify, mixed-use corridors, especially if you have corridors that are sprawling with lots of scattered, fragmented uses. We're always looking for opportunities to have transformative projects that are mixed use for those types of corridors. At the crosshairs of secondary corridors, iconic buildings like former schools, churches, warehouses that could be rehabbed and converted. Locations that have vista views along the river and the bluffs. You kind of get the idea, and infill locations. So a little bit of that if you want to get into the narrative and kind of read more on the location strategies and recommendations. So I'm going to try to get my way back, navigate my way back to that chart. So on the right-hand side, I already shared with you 10 owner-occupied new builds every year and 75 on rental. I also looked at it in a different way. If you add those up, it's 85. I took the same 85, the exact same data set, and then I ran the model differently. I said, well, let's look at detached houses versus attached units. This detached units, it could actually include a few townhouses with private entrances if you have them, in Bellows Falls. And some of these migrating target markets, which I'll show you in a minute, some of them will choose to buy an attached townhouse that has a private entrance, but that's not usually the rule of thumb, and especially not in a smaller rural market like Bellows Falls. Usually I only recommend that you build attached townhouses in really special places, like where the land is at a real high premium, like right along the Connecticut River or on the island, or in places that have just spectacular views where, there may be an advantage, a real clear advantage for the developer to actually build something that's attached to get as much profit as possible out of that special land. Otherwise, we're typically talking about detached houses. And those can be configured in different ways. Now, it's important to kind of study this data because I said only 10 homeowners, 10 buyers every year, yet 50 detached units like houses. And I also said 75 renters, but the numbers show only 35 attached units. And the reason is that many of these renters that are migrating into the village are actually going to be looking to rent a house. And this is something that we've seen really shift in many markets across the nation. Really everywhere we're dealing with this, where renters are renting houses. And it's really shifted, in the last decade or so. And many communities had started even adopting policies where they're just going to not allow houses to be rented by renters, because they felt that this was a shift away from what they were comfortable with. They really wanted houses to be owner occupied and wanted all the renters to be in apartments. But what we're really finding is that there are a lot of lifestyle clusters that actually our renters really want to rent a house. That is their lifestyle preference. So if we ignore that, we could actually be blinded to a market potential and an opportunity. So it's just something to be aware of, particularly like the family funtastic. They like to move, they're very mobile, they like to be footloose and free. They have a lot of toys. They will move from Bellows Falls to White River Junction in a heartbeat if they think they can have more entertainment for their family. And they want to rent houses. They rent houses. So if I try to allocate that, I put all the owners into detached houses, and I fill as many of the attached units as possible with renters, which means that the deduction, the balance, here's the same 85, the balance is that about 40 of the renters are probably going to be looking to rent a house. I can also show you, I'm going to keep going here. The next page shows all of the target markets for Bellows Falls are all listed here, starting at E19. And I don't actually have Family Funtastic, didn't quite make it onto the list today because you don't quite have yet. I know you're working on it, and I know that improvements will be made 5 years from now when you've implemented some of the things that are in the rec plan. I think that we'll be much better positioned to compete with White River Junction for the Family Funtastic. Today, my sense is that, we're just not ready. You only have 6 of those households today. Even if all of them move, I don't have enough of them that are going to be owners, and enough, they just don't quite populate in the model. They just didn't quite make it and they didn't show up in the model strong enough for me to actually identify them as a target market. There are, however, others on this list that are also intriguing, interesting, and important. I'm going to take a sip here. Among the home buyers, I said 10 every year, brand new only. 2 of them are going to be digital dependents for Bellows Falls. So these are brand new owners migrating into the village each year. 2 of them will be digital dependents. 1 of them will be a town elder or leader, and then the others, 1 will be infant and debit card. You get the idea. They all roll up to about 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 of them. Here are the renters. So the reason why this sheet had some blanks is that I wanted the list to be the same on both sheets. So you could compare them side by side easily. Here's the owners, here's the renters, the same set. Now we have 14 digital dependents and 15 Bohemian Groove. Those are going to be your biggest target markets on renter units. So if you built more for-lease lofts, for example, or for-lease cottages even, these are the lifestyle clusters that are most inclined to rent those units. Remember that I said that the lowest number, like 19, is more affluent than the lowest number of 71. So you can see a little bit of a blip here in the low income. These folks would be what I would consider looking for low, affordable housing choices. And if developers say, we can't afford to build that kind of an affordable housing unit and make the pro forma work, and they choose not to build that, then chances are these households migrating in will have to find something else, something that's pre-existing, pre-leased, and hopefully rehabbed. And if sorry about that. So again, there will be some shuffling where maybe some of the more affluent renters that are already in the market might trade into new units, and perhaps it makes a little bit of room for these lower income folks to be able to move in and pick up something that they can actually afford. So again, some of that shuffling can happen. There is such a thing as kind of trading upward on income. So if developers come in and build on the market rate, which would typically be really starting at mid-family troopers here, market rate, all the way up through the Bohemian Grove. These are all market rate renters. Let's say instead of building 30, we decide we're going to build the majority of the units in this market rate price bracket. It will enable existing renters to also trade up into those units and still leave room, wiggle room, hopefully, in the market for these guys to still migrate in. That alone is probably not really a great strategy. Most affordable housing agencies will recommend that we still need to add new builds and still need to address the need for these lower income households. It's not really fair to say that every low income household should have to accept something that's rehabbed or pre-existing. Why can't we build something smaller that, that could accommodate some of these low income households? And that's when we really start talking about step buildings and thinking about small building formats. On the market rate, even in here on the family troopers, driving singles, digital dependents especially, we shouldn't be building supersized, jumbo townhouses for lease. For many of these renters, they are still singles with one wage earner. And although they're market rate, they're not really going to want to pay $1,600 a month for a place to lease. Many of them will be looking for smaller units that are more attainably and tolerably priced. So those are words that I use carefully. Here I say affordable. Here I say tolerable. Here I say attainable. And market rate, and then we start talking about up in here, we start talking about luxury. So those adjectives are important as you think about the different target markets and what their price tolerance is. I also went another step further where let's see if I can find it. Okay, before I jump into prices, I want to clarify that I ran the model one other way. I ran the model on, so before let me back up just to clarify. When I ran these numbers, I was looking at in-migration only. And it even says it in this short paragraph that I managed to squeeze in between these charts here. It says all charts represent the minimum conservative market potential based on in-migration only and excluding internal movership. So these numbers do not account for all the households that would shuffle within. Then I ran the model a second way. And if you go to section A, this is actually the aggressive scenario. It says all charts represent the maximum aggressive potential based on both in-migration and internal movership. So instead of having 10, if I include the internal movership, households that are shuffling within, I actually can push the number up to 35 on the owners. Now we could argue that only 10 of them should be new builds and 25 should be rehabs. And again, who takes what is all part of the shuffling game. So you could argue again, 10 new builds and 25 rehabs for a total of 35. That's still the conservative scenario. It's 10 new builds, 25 rehabs. It's still conservative. I call it aggressive if you say, well, what's the maximum that we could build? I would say, well, just based on total migration, you could actually try to build up to 35 new builds. So this would be kind of, think of it as a bookends. That we've got the left bookend is 10 new builds for in-migrating, plus 25 for rehab. And the right end is the combined, the total, 35 new builds. Let's just build 35 and try to see if we can do that. And let all the others just kind of shuffle and trade and swap and hopefully the market will shake itself out. We can do the same thing on the renters. I said a minimum of 75 new builds for new renters. Well, we have just as many that are migrating within the market. And in fact, we could even possibly go to 150 new builds, and that would be the absolute maximum. I wouldn't try to build more than that in any given year. So what this means is I'm trying to give you a sense of perspective and scale and some bookends. So if a developer comes and says, well, we want to build a 200 unit massive loft building, and it's all renter occupied, 200 units, I would be a little nervous. I would say, you know what, you might not hit the absorption rate that you really hope that you can hit, because 200 units might not move all in 1 year. What if they would consider something smaller? What if they'd be willing to build a 25 unit or a 20 unit building? And maybe they just build one a year for the next 5 years and break them down into smaller pieces, into smaller buildings. Now you can hit your absorption and feel confident. 20 units as a share of the total market potential is not as risky as doing 200 units when the maximum is 150. So it's a sense of, again, just a sense of scale. The last piece that I really want to walk you through here that's important is the prices. So these are the owner values. And again, I know based on the incomes of the households that are migrating into Rockingham, into Windham County, and into Bellows Falls, I was able to make some deductions on what their price tolerance would be in terms of home values and contract rents. So of those 35, that I'm working with the maximum now, and it's really detached, mostly houses, very few townhouses, only in special locations, all owners, 35 is the max. And here's kind of their tolerance. It's really kind of flat, spread out in terms of their home value tolerance. 4 of them will hope that they can find something 175 or less. If they can't, they'll look for something that was pre-owned. And if you build in this bracket, if you build in here and don't build in here, then still maybe some of your existing owners could trade up and maybe these guys could still move in. But we do try to build at these lower price brackets if possible. If we're doing that, in order to make those prices profitable for a developer or a builder, we may be looking at some real small step buildings, things like small cottages. So the pictures there that I've shown, Neil is going to maybe show you more at another day, or maybe at the end of today, he could give you a preview. But there's about 50 different step buildings in the Incremental Development Alliance typology. And I've just hand selected a few here to show you. I'm really focused on ones that have porches and that have private entrances. And even if you did a double duplex where maybe 2 units share a lot, that each one still has a sense of privacy and a porch, and that they're not right on top of each other. So I wouldn't recommend doing a duplex where the entrances are right on top of each other and where they're sharing a porch. And I'm saying that's specific to Bellows Falls and Vermont, and to a small community. I've just learned in working with small communities that the lifestyle preference of these owners is that they want their own place, and they want a sense of privacy, and they want a view. So it's very different than like an urban, if I were doing a study for downtown Detroit, these buildings would look different. We would have the houses, the entrances right next to each other. They'd be sharing porches. We'd have all eyes on the street, all eyes forward and to the front. Whereas in other communities that are small rural places, we know that the stakeholders really, even if you're sharing a lot or sharing walls, you still want privacy. Here's the renters. So at the low end of the spectrum, 650 and going all the way up to 1600, but being really careful up in here. These have to be really special locations. We don't want to go into established neighborhoods where all of the existing units are priced in this rent bracket and think that we can get 1,600. At 1,600, what we're really doing is building row houses or townhouses with views of the Connecticut River or views of a bluff or something that's really special, that really makes that place unique. At the lower end of the spectrum, and at 650, we're talking about micro, small apartments and small micro units, that would be sharing, apartment houses. We may be looking at accessory dwellings. I had a question about the prices also, why we weren't showing something lower. And honestly, in Michigan, where I do a lot of my work, and other upper Midwestern states, the prices are easily at 400, 450, 500. I mean, I would see more numbers in here. There's something in the Vermont, Wyndham, Rockingham, Bellows Falls, that whole market is that the existing choices in the market today are really on the high end. So it's pushing up the prices on what would be considered market rate. This is not an affordable housing study, so I'm not necessarily saying, these renters here, that based on their income, they should only spend 30% of their income on rent, and that would definitely put them in these lower brackets. That wasn't really my approach. My approach was based on market conditions. What are the developers likely to build, and what are these target markets, even the lowest income ones? What are they going to tolerate? So these rents might actually represent 40 or 45% of their income. So again, these are not affordable prices necessarily. They're just tolerable. They're tolerable. So I want to show you real quickly the real estate analysis. I actually went through the market. I actually went through all of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Northwestern Massachusetts. And I tried to garner a list. I have a 5-page list here of everything that was available for lease, for rent. I realized there were really two markets. One is a luxury, seasonal, or furnished market. And another is kind of a standardized market rate market. So I separated the data into two data sets. I basically grabbed the contract rent and the square feet, and then I calculated the rent per square feet. The rent per square foot. And this is again, asking rent per square foot. And I kind of moved the data into two different data sets so that I could chart when my graph, the gray lines here are picking up this column, and the blue dots are picking up the standard column. Two different data series and using an Excel chart tool. So you can kind of see the difference here. There's a relationship again, starting with the title, estimated rent per square foot for that geography. And the x-axis shows the unit size in square feet. And the y-axis shows the estimated, I see a typo, which I want to fix. So I'm just going to flag that for myself. So the y-axis shows the asking rent per square foot. And there's always a relationship. The smaller the unit, the higher the rent per square foot. And you can see that clearly on this chart. Smaller units will get a higher rent per square foot. They're more efficient. And a larger unit will get a lower rent per square foot. And then you can really see where the luxury market is in here. And then these units, honestly, I think these are probably like Airbnb, you rent by the month, rent by the week sort of thing. So they're houses, I'm sorry, not large, but they're houses, and you rent the whole house and you're paying a premium because it's furnished and maybe it's on a river or a creek and there's some sort of water access and there's a beautiful view, and it's basically a vacation home. So I took this into consideration when I put together the charts on what the market potential is by rent, as I really considered the fact that even on let's say a 1,000 square foot, and these are all for lease, 1,000 square foot for lease unit, the minimum is $1 a square foot. And kind of the average is about $1.50. And if I did a new build, I could probably try to get $2 a square foot. If I'm in the luxury market, new build, I'd be at $2.50. And if I'm in the premium market, I might even be at $3 a square foot. So I'm somewhere in here, and it's a test to say, well, what am I building? Is it modest? Is it moderate? Is it on the river? Is it luxury? Well, what if I go to a smaller unit? What if I build a what if I build a 400 square foot accessory dwelling for lease? You know, I could easily start off at $2 a square foot. And on the luxury market, I could maybe get $4 a square foot. Let's go to the other end. Let's say I'm thinking like many developers do, well, I need a high rent to offset my cost. Therefore, I'm going to supersize the unit. And we show them, well, you can supersize the unit if you want, build a 1,500 square foot cottage if you want, but you're going to get $1 a square foot. You're not going to get two, unless even if it's a luxury, you're still only going to get $1.50. So understanding that relationship, and that's why incremental step buildings are so important, especially in today's market where the cost of construction, the cost of materials and labor especially, is going up so fast right now. And we're finding that migrating households are absolutely willing to compromise and trade a little bit on the square footage and trade that off in order to pay a lower rent. And the developer knows that he's getting a higher rent per square foot. He can probably build, instead of 3 cottages, maybe he can build 4. And instead of building 3 kitchens and 3 bathrooms, he's building 4 kitchens and 4 bathrooms, which is more expensive, but hopefully he can get it back on the rent per square foot. And that's part of the reason why these charts in here that I was showing you later, you know, just the current market conditions are loaded into this a little bit. I can tell you in Michigan, again, just to give you my local home state perspective, it's really rare in Michigan to find anything, even small, that would be at $2 or $2.50 a square foot. $2.50 would be just exceptional in Michigan, anywhere. So my brain had to really kind of adjust to Vermont to realize that there's something really unique going on in Vermont. It's a vacation state. People love to go, you know, upstate to get away and for a month with their family. And I think it's putting downward pressure on the supply of choices for year-round residents that are just workers and commuters needing an attainably, affordably priced, tolerably priced rental. And it's really, you know, it's making it tough. And when developers come in and they know this intuitively, even if they don't chart it, you know, it's a challenge to find developers then that are willing to build in this market and build in this market if they think that they can actually build in this market. So that's a challenge, is finding partnerships with developers that are willing to work with you, work with the town and the village through a collaborative relationship, and to actually find ways to incentivize, motivate, and compromise with them in ways that they're willing to go after this market. The benefit here is that once you get a renter settled into a new build, they're likely to stay. They're not going to give up. They're not going to give up their unit and move as quickly, especially in Bellows Falls, where we already saw that the movership rates are low. The challenge in this market is that you got high turnover, so lots of maintenance. If these are turning over every 6 months or every month, or they're just monthly rentals, I mean, you're in there repairing things every month, and those monthly rentals, just seasonal families, can be really hard on places that they rent. So there's a big overhead on maintenance that gets probably loaded into that cost. So I realize I've been talking a lot, and I am going to pause here because I do want to make sure that there's time for questions, and also that Neil and Brian have time to talk about step buildings and to talk about next steps. So I'm going to stop here and ask Sarah. Sarah, if you would step in and let me know if there's questions that you saw in the chat box that you think we should address.
Thank you. I don't think there were any questions typed in, but I would love to open it up to anyone to unmute themselves. I know Wendy sent ahead a few questions that she had. I think Sharon touched on a few of them in her presentation, but Wendy, why don't I put you on the spot and let us know what other questions you have that maybe you want clarification on.
And I have questions printed out, but I think it would be good if you just restate them for the group.
Oh, actually, you did answer them.
Good.
The most important thing, well, first of all, I just want to say this is just great data. It's super, super helpful, and thank you. And your explanation is really going to make a difference to just understanding the data for the future. Just a new question that I have is, it sounds as if the market data is from 2020 and maybe some from 2021, which if it is, that's terrific again, because things have changed so much.
I have actually done projections. So when I do these charts, I say 2025, I actually did projections. For example, households by tenure. I actually took the 2019 data, which is the most current year that we have, and I projected the data forward. And I'm glad you asked this question, because I do want to explain that I did load in. It's kind of a double load here, because I made an assumption that you could actually achieve the market potential. So I ran the model, and then I said, well, this suggests that we could do 35 up a maximum of 35 new builds every year. Well, let's just load that into the forecast and see if we can, give you every benefit of the doubt that you actually build at least 25 units every year. So I went from 575 to 600 and just bounced it, gave you 25 units every year and loaded that in, and then reran the model. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. And then just one other kind of follow up to one of my earlier questions is the use of the term new build. Bellows Falls, like other communities in Vermont, is very intentionally dense. It's a village type, and already walkable. And is it possible when reading this to just say that a very well rehabbed unit could be equivalent to a new build? I mean, I know, like, I myself would just rather live in an older building where the bathroom is redone, the plumbing is up to date, electrical up to date. I personally find a higher value in an older building than a newer building, and I'm wondering if that's not usual. If new buildings are always preferred to older buildings, it seems to be that the terminology is saying that.
So the terminology is based on the assumption that markets in general want to grow in population and households. So if you decide that you do not want to grow, that you don't want to add households or population, then your hypothesis would be reasonable. It's reasonable to say, let's just take our existing housing stock and let's just rehab what we have and not build anything new. Maybe we don't have room to build. Maybe we don't have land to build, which I understand might be a challenge. However, that scenario will not give you a growth scenario. So the other thing is that I did look to try to answer that as well, to give it some context. I like to look at vacancies. So real quickly, I have units by, okay.
Right. Can I just add something while you're looking at that? There are in Bellows Falls very large houses that are occupied maybe by one or two people or unoccupied that could be broken up into nice units, probably 4 or 5 units, some of them. So I'm not suggesting that we don't grow, but just that buildings that aren't at their highest potential be renovated.
So absolutely, I want you to rehab. Personally, I think that every time a house or a unit changes occupancy, it ought to have some sort of a remodel, if not a rehab.
Plus, I'm
So
just
it's-
thinking,
well, I absolutely, I wouldn't say put all your eggs in one basket and just focus on new builds and not do rehabs. Absolutely, it's a multi-pronged approach and you should do both.
Okay.
So here, when I look at vacancies by tenure, the top half is for sale, the bottom half is for lease. I saw your for sale vacancies slightly tick up, but honestly, this isn't real alarming to me. And knowing that, I think you could build a maximum of 35 new builds every year. I think even if you didn't do anything for a year, you know, you're always going to have some vacancies, or you should. Going back, I'm not sure what's going on with the data here. I'm not sure I believe entirely that there were absolutely no for sale vacancies at all in the market, although this seems to suggest that. But I'm not alarmed to see that you have 35 vacancies. That doesn't seem especially high. Although in here, I did notice that right now your adjusted vacancy rate, excluding seasonally occupied units, does feel a little high. So I'm not sure, that doesn't quite match up with this. Here on the rental units, I'm seeing your vacancies come down, steadily down, since this was really our last recovery year, and we should be seeing vacancies come down. So it tells me, you know, kind of what's the tolerance, what's the threshold on vacancies. This is probably your threshold on vacancies right now. So let's try to rehab those and get them back out into occupancy and get your vacancy back down to 0 to 8. Here, I would say we're doing a really good job of filling up the rental units. It tells me even more, we need to build more. We really need to build more in here. And I wouldn't be afraid to watch these vacancy rates go up for a little while. I want to see construction go up, and I would tolerate seeing these vacancies climb back up to 100 units instead of just 45. That's okay, because what you're doing is you're offering choices. If every renter then has you know, at least 2 choices to choose from, and that will enable you to grow in households and in population.
Sue, I know you were trying to chime in there, and then Pat typed in a question.
yeah, no, I was just gonna build off of what Wendy was saying about, you know, rehabbing older homes. There are other larger historic buildings in the community that may not have housing that could accommodate it. So that could be rehab for, you know, whether it be a downtown building, rehabbing the upper floors, or an older industrial building or something that could be used for the rehab too.
Absolutely. So in here on page 6 of the narrative, I do talk again about just kind of the iconic buildings, especially, you know, so, you know, converting. I mean, this could, I think I hear what you're saying. I mean, new builds, it kind of brings to mind that we're building from the ground up, right? But I think that a new build absolutely could include taking a vacant building that doesn't have any use at all right now and converting that and rehabbing that building into residential units. That absolutely qualifies as a new build. It's a new unit.
Awesome, thank you. Pat, do you want to chime in with what you were typing in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was a little late coming in. I'm just wondering where the income data comes from what I own the bookstore, Sharon, you might not realize, so I'm kind of familiar with the clientele here. And I'm just wondering where that income data is coming from. And also, we do not have wealthy people who are conservative here. 90% of the people are registered Democratic. We just don't have that. And some of the underpinnings I'm a little confused about. We had a lot of people that moved here after 9/11 from the city and took houses that were multiple family and changed them into single family again. So they rehabbed the whole house, maybe took out the extra kitchen and made it into a single family house. And I am part owner of the hotel building which has an unoccupied second and third floor, which could either be used as hotel or residential.
Mhm. Yep, so the income data comes from the American Community Survey, and so I have actual data through 2019. And then again, I am being a bit bullish on forecasting the income growth. And you can see it on this chart. The top half is owners, the bottom half is renters. And so I tend to do this because I know that most communities that I work with are interested in attracting new households that also bring new wealth and new, better income households into their communities. So I am loading some assumptions in here. I'm making the assumption that you would like to intercept households that are a little better heeled than maybe some of your existing resident households. So, and that if you did that, if you actually did achieve the market potential, that you could actually not, this isn't just income growth of existing households suddenly becoming, suddenly having salary increases or getting better jobs. It's actually what's loaded in here is the income that is brought with new households that are migrating into the community and helping lift that income up a bit.
We've had that the past year with people who had second homes that have moved up here or have just bought a house sight unseen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they're here, families that are here. So we are getting that influx already.
And I'm seeing it everywhere, really, that the biggest challenge that we face in communities is that the rich get richer faster and the poor don't get rich as fast. And the poor, so having the same growth rate, on owners versus renters can have different effects. For owners, this difference, it's mostly discretionary income. For renters, this difference is it really is about having a better quality of life, having an apartment or a rental unit where the heat actually works and the hot water actually runs and the landlord actually fixes the lock when you need it fixed.
Unfortunately, we have some apartments that are expensive, but that maintenance still is not happening. And talking to, I've been making deliveries to people the past 6 months or so and seeing the conditions that they're living in and then knowing how much they tell me they're paying for rent. It's astounding.
And I fear that it's because the market is so, it's because
there isn't anything available.
Right. So if the landlords are getting, even on a tiny unit, they're getting $2 a square foot on rent, they're not motivated. They're not incentivized at all to make improvements. They can continue to get $2 a square foot all day without putting a nickel into the units. And it's because, it's driven by the Vermont setting. You're unique, this beautiful state of Vermont, with this vacation market that is just putting pressure from the top down on the availability of units that are for just regular folks, just working singles and working families. It has skewed the prices, unfortunately. So that means it's harder work then to find a couple of developers, usually local ambassadors, people who are just really have deep, passionate feelings about the community and their neighborhood, willing to come into the market and to collaborate with the town and the village and actually try to build, convert, rehab, whatever you can do, but to work with you through collaboration on getting more units built in this kind of, in this space. Usually that means finding ways to streamline the permit approval process, removing barriers to zoning, and to building codes, and just finding ways to remove barriers that might be keeping them from actually building what is needed in the market. And again, I'm stumbling because this is Neil's area of expertise.
We do have Neil and Brian had to step out to another meeting, but David is here. And David, I'll hand it over to you in just a minute because I think it is important for people to understand like what now that we have all this awesome data, like what are we going to do with it? So, but I want to give Robert, you're unmuted, so I'm assuming you want to share or ask a question. Oh. Okay.
I can think one up. No, I just wanted to kind of, also realize that there is as far as I understand, very limited lot space or anything in which to build in Bellows Falls. It's not that areas couldn't be identified like the island was mentioned, and whether that it's appropriate for zoning and stuff. So I think it's really important to stress when we talk about new build that it can be going into an empty building and rebuilding, so people don't just think it's all from the ground up building and stuff. So I think that's a lot of where the potential is, and I would very much underline the concept of the collaborative aspect of the possibility of working together. There are a lot of committed landlords in town to doing exactly this, to bringing up their apartments when someone moves out and doing it. So there is a core of landlords, I think, to work with that are motivated and investing in the community at this point.
Right. So what you can do is, especially if you have if you have publicly owned property that's owned by the jurisdiction or maybe it's in a land bank, if you have a land bank, anything that any land like that you can choose who to work with. The beauty of publicly owned properties or buildings is that you can do an RFQ process to find the right partner that's going to work with you. And then you can give them the land at a bargain, and in exchange, they build or reconvert what you want and make sure that it's 12-month lease and that, they're hitting the unit sizes appropriately and in such a way that the rents are attainable.
Thank you,
Robert. Gary.
Yeah, hi. So I just wanted to briefly say, like a little commercial break, that this market study from Sharon is immensely valuable, and wanted to thank who made it possible. We had matching funds from the Vermont Council on Rural Development, Vermont Natural Resources Council, the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, the Preservation Trust of Vermont, and the Vermont Community Foundation, and those funds matched the program sponsor, BDCC and Southern Vermont Economy Project, and even more valuable, their contribution of Sarah's time to put the program together, organize it, direct the programs, and Sarah's done a great job working with the town and having the program meet our needs. And along those lines, in the full program, so Sharon's presented all this target market data, and the technical assistance program helps us. What are the constraints we have here in Bellows Falls, and how do we work with those? So I'll turn it back over to David and Sarah. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, and Gary, I don't know if you just want to mention real quick about the commercial that we're having Sharon do some commercial market analysis, or I don't know, Sharon, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that yet, but.
Yep.
Sure. So separate from our residential housing study and technical assistance, there is also a area-wide plan through Wyndham Regional, the Wyndham Regional Commission, and we did raise some funds over this technical assistance program, and we're able to apply that for some commercial and industrial market study that will feed into and help our area-wide plan of some of the areas that folks were talking about earlier, the island area and some other places.
Awesome. Thanks, Gary. Any other questions before David just speaks a little bit on sort of what the next steps are and how we're going to use this to move forward? Okay. David?
Thanks, Sarah. So what are the next steps? I think what's remaining here, aside from a meeting that Neil and I both have to have with the building inspector or the fire official, the state fire official, I guess. He acts as the building inspector for the village and county, or for the town. What remains is a spot test, which is a it's basically an exercise where we have various different members of the community. Usually it'll involve some of the people who are doing the regulatory work, enforcement, and like some developers, some community activists. We'll bring them to the table and we'll provide a 2 or 3 scenarios, meaning taking a kind of looking at a one, maybe a very typical lot size in the village of Bellows Falls, and then seeing if, okay, here's one aspect of what is needed. Basically, the things that we've learned from the market study as well, in terms of what are the type of housing that is needed in the village that we want to build and that we like to see happen. And so we'll take that, we'll set up a scenario, and then we'll have them go through the exercise of actually laying something out and actually going through and seeing how the zoning, the underlying zoning of Bellows Falls, and how that all mixes with the financial framework of a development. And so obviously what will come to light is some of the basically parking requirements often are our biggest hurdles to creating the amount of density that you'd like to see, the number of housing units that you'd like to see on a particular lot, which makes it affordable development, affordably doable development. But you'll find that there are other regulatory requirements that will nullify being able to do a project that you want to see, that are also part of it's often part of the town or the village vision of, hey, we want to see our village moving in this direction, and oftentimes that the codes don't allow that to happen, and it makes for zoning by variance or zoning by asking for relief before a board, and that takes time and money. So hopefully we'll create 2 or 3 scenarios, and maybe 2 or 3 different building types that are called for, that we see that are part of the demand of the market study that the market analysis identified. And so it'll be an exercise where you can identify the barriers, and here are some of the barriers that we need to be working on, and prioritize those barriers for reform for the municipality. So.
Great. And Wendy, I don't know, you had mentioned this is kind of a side note, but you had mentioned in the chat about how the state is moving towards regulating rentals. I don't know if you want to just share a sentence or 2 on that, because I think that's a interesting piece.
Sure. I was actually thinking this report could be helpful in that conversation, because it documents, and we were aware of it in the ski areas, the to market aspect, because there's been a big need to provide affordable housing in those areas. But to see it in the non-ski areas is pretty interesting. And I think having that data would be valuable to the folks who are trying to regulate. I got to be careful not to get political. Trying to regulate B&B or Airbnb rather,
yeah.
because what there's legislation, and others probably know more than I do about it, to require that in order to have an Airbnb, it has to be on the property that the owner's living on, which is would be a huge impact to the market. Is that others' understanding of the legislation? So so that's one, that's a more recent activity. But for years, the state has been looking at regulating the quality and the condition of rentals more than it currently does. Some of the towns regulate it, but it's generally not as regulated as in other places. So the quality can slip if you don't have a responsible owner.
Yeah. Thanks, Wendy. Robert?
Yeah, and Sharon, I mean, that was a fascinating presentation, and my brain doesn't work in that way at all, but it's like, wow, there is a lot of information that a lot of people need to see this recording, you know, within our town hall, as well as just individuals before we get back together and discuss, because it was really, really fascinating. The only thing I'd like to kind of bring up or question is, I love the range that you showed from north to south of communities. But I think if we could see some stuff a little bit in the lens of Bellows Falls in relation to Springfield and Brattleboro, it might be a little more realistic because we share this industrial history. Not that White River Junction doesn't, but White River Junction has this intersection of I-89 and 91. And then it also has Dartmouth, Hanover, you know, which is, you know, the medical center and Dartmouth College, which is, we don't have that. I mean, we still get a dribble effect of people that work up there, but that's not an energy we're drawing off of as much. That might show certain figures that allow that area to expand more in a certain way. So I think the histories of Brattleboro and the relationships we have going into the Pioneer Valley and Massachusetts overflow is good. But I mean, I'm not saying to redo everything, but I just think, I don't know how other people feel, but there might be some more information that really helps lead us into the southern Springfield and Brattleboro development moving forward.
So
Maybe Sue can talk about that as a Wyndham Regional kind of person or something too. Hi, Sue.
so Springfield and Brattleboro are included in the information in the study.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't talk about them a lot. The only one I really talked about was White River Junction, and I just talked about the family fantastics. Right. But that doesn't mean that White River Junction is the only place in the study. The study actually includes all of the places that you just mentioned. So in the interest of time, and we just don't have time to go through all of the markets and do a comparison together through all those markets, but the data is there. So I will really encourage you to, when you have your own copy, to kind of hunt in the reports for that information and kind of do your own, you know, as I said, I mean, some of these markets are going to be relatable for you, Robert, and others will be more relatable for somebody else. So, you know, just kind of choose the markets that you know and can relate to and kind of go through the comparisons. And I really encourage you to kind of try to draw your own conclusions and observations and deductions. Don't be afraid at all when you're looking at the data to hypothesize that some of the data is correlated. Like, well, because of this, maybe this, or because maybe this has an impact on the data that way. I really encourage that kind of thinking because, you know, I'm really giving you a lot of data, but you know your market best. You are there locally on the ground. This is your community. So you can help, you will qualify all of the data by studying it and drawing those connections.
Yeah, it's like we need our own little book group about it. to read
Yeah,
through it and do
You
it.
need a book club.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, because this is really important information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to be mindful of the time. It is 12:34. I know we sort of had this on the calendar for 2 hours, but it's always nice to end early, free time. So I don't know if there are any other follow-up questions. Oh, Bonnie, yes, please.
This isn't really a question. I don't, Sarah sent me this data a couple days ago and I spent a number of hours with it. But Sharon's examination did help. So I didn't quite understand why that data was even there. But one thing I extrapolated from looking at it carefully myself is that right now, 50% of our renters have renting households have annual income 15,000 or less. So does that tell us that 50% of our renting households are on Section 8?
Poverty.
Mm.
But Bonnie, maybe that's why we have so much free and reduced lunch in the school system.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it all ties together.
But I mean, I'm asking this question. Is that what that means? I mean,
It doesn't mean that they're on Section H. It means that they could be Section H eligible.
Or again, if we have over 50% of the kids getting free and reduced lunch, that's where the population is for the younger families.
so I guess when we look at migration and so forth, that's just something to be aware of. I mean, that seems like a really high percentage of our rentals. So all this rental data, I don't think you can really look at it without keeping that in mind. I guess that's all I had to say. I mean, I did read it correctly, I think. I looked at all these lifestyle, things associated with percentages and so forth. So,
Right. The challenge is that I can't find anything anywhere in Vermont or New Hampshire where the rent is $375, which would be 30% of my income if I'm earning 15. If I'm earning 15, my rent should be less than 400, and I guarantee you I will not find anything like that in Vermont. So absolutely, to clarify again, this isn't an affordable. I did not try to do an affordable housing study, which would have taken those HUD income limits and made assumptions about 30%, 50, 80% of AMI. I didn't approach it that way. What I really did is I said, this is what the migrating households will tolerate. So if they're actually going to tolerate 600 and multiply that by 12, and divide that by 15,000. I mean, they're actually spending 50% of their income on rent, and they're tolerating it. And that is actually the market. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not advocating for that, but it is unfortunately just the economic realities.
well, are they tolerating it, or are government subsidies tolerating it? I guess that's the
I'm
question.
not
Jeff and Robert are both landlords, but from what I can tell, most people are paying 600 to 800 people a month for rent. That's I think that's pretty typical. If you look at something that's available, that's where it's going to come in on. And if we have so much free and reduced lunch people, then somebody's subsidizing it, but that's what the rent market is here. There just isn't anything available. And I think the excitement of having the Bellows Falls garage is that it might have brought in a few people at a higher level of single people coming in to kind of mix up the market a little bit.
And I think to keep in mind when affordability, what people can afford in terms of housing is, if they're expending more than 30% of their income, they're giving up on something which is usually transportation, because those two costs, are the biggest drivers of an income. I mean, of costs for a household. And so it could be, I guess it really depends on where, their options for employment might be reduced because of their limited reach in terms of what they have available for transportation. But so it's kind of I think we have to keep that in mind as well in terms of affordability. It's also what are the jobs that are available within easy reach without transportation.
I also want to emphasize, this is why it's important to have new builds, is because as you build more units or convert vacant buildings into more units, you are adding more supply. And when the supply goes up, the vacancy rate goes up and the rents come down, or the rents stay at least a little more equalized or a little more stable. If you build nothing, your vacancy rate will continue to fall, the prices will continue to go up, and the poor will continue to be overburdened.
And I think another thing that's, important to look at in rental, what a rental unit rents for, is what's included or not. In other words, is heat included in that rental amount? That's a big difference than if heat is not included in that rental amount, because heat's a significant thing in Vermont, So when you're looking at figures, we have to see what's included in those rents and what isn't included in those rents, and where that puts the burden on the tenant.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's true even in commercial, because we include heat in our rentals. And that meant we had to pay additional money into the partnership to pay for the heat this last year and a half.
Right.
And it's exacerbated if you are renting a house and you're on propane, you're really in trouble. And now you also live even further away from your place of work. So now you have a double whammy that you're spending more on fuel just to get to work. So yeah, we recognize these are really tough challenges, and the easiest way, the control that you have is to facilitate and enable and collaborate to add more new builds to help increase the supply, to help bring the prices down. And everyone will trade, everyone will shuffle, and hopefully it will just loosen things up a little bit for the lowest echelon.
Wendy?
Well, and the other thing here is that we've talked about having something available for people, more elderly people that want to move out of a big house and have something really nice available for them to move into. And then that would allow a family to come in and buy their larger house. So having other things available would be very helpful for the whole market.
Yeah. Jeff, and then Wendy?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak on at least one thing. So I know that the demand for good quality rentals is very high. All of my units are filled. There's no vacancy. This week, I think 3 people looking for units alone. Do you have anything? Do you know of anybody? I reach out to other landlords. They're not out there. I think there is a small number of really good quality apartments in Bellows Falls, and there is a larger quantity of poorly cared for buildings. I think there's a huge opportunity for improving the village through renovation of the existing units. I think there's not a lot of land, there's not a lot of opportunity to be building new units, and anything on a hillside looking at the river, I think is not going to happen just due to tree lines and so forth, for whether that's single family or otherwise. But I think there are certainly buildings that could be converted, and this whole study, market analysis, I think could be very powerful for the town and marketing as a resident owner and also landlord and trustee. I'm encouraged, and I think that we really need to get this out in front of those folks who of similar mind that would be willing to invest. They need to know the town is keenly interested in this and is going to support their investment if they're going to, be doing this. And I don't think that everybody's motivated by profit, but they need to cover their costs certainly, and feel that, they are giving something of value if they're going to be giving up profit in the process. So I'm encouraged, and I just hope that everybody gets on board behind this, and we can get more people at the government level as well as investment level to be on the same page and communicate and work together, because there's huge opportunity, and there are buildings out there without having to build new.
Yes, so we do, real quickly, we recommend that you do post this online on your website, where you can just easily send somebody a link and share copies liberally. I mean, just give it away freely. Let any developer who wants package it, bundle it into their application for a loan for gap financing to make a project work. I mean, just cast it out there and let the private sector have it.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon.
Thanks, Sharon. Wendy?
Just briefly, since transportation was brought up, the mover is the provider of public transportation, and there is public transportation. It's at no fee now. The board meets the second Wednesday of every month. Feel free to show up. We very rarely get public comment, but it would be helpful to have input from the public.
Awesome. Thanks, Wendy. Bonnie?
Yeah, just one last quick question, and I don't think you're probably going to be able to answer it right now. I saw no discussion of condominiums in this, and I'm wondering why.
So to answer that, I usually view condominiums as a form of ownership. So I talked quite a bit about townhouses, and that is my own translation of condos. So, and we will talk about townhouses and row houses and duplexes and triplexes and all sorts of different formats that may or may not have a condominium type of ownership. But we will talk about that further when we get into the step buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Any last comments? Awesome. Sharon, I know that this document is a draft. I'm assuming you will send something that's sort of finalized with whatever last minute edits or anything that you need to do. Okay.
Yep, absolutely. I actually would like to let you have it for a couple of weeks, everyone on this call. And if you see anything funny, I just caught a typo today. I know I have to go back and fix a typo. Hey, just, flag those things. Please send your catches or your corrections to Sarah. She will gather them up and then she'll relay them to me. And then I'll make one pass through the document to make any minor, kind of refinements.
Great. And then with that, maybe Gary, you could help us get it on the town website after that.
Yep. I would say send it to Sarah. Sarah, make sure you copy Gary so he's in the loop on your email.
All right. Well, that was very informative, and we did a dry run of this a few days ago, and so honestly, having 2 runs through it really helps. And so this, like I said, is being recorded, so I would definitely suggest taking this recording and going through it again and just listening to all the bits and pieces, because there are definitely things that I missed the first time. So Sharon, this was really awesome, and I think there's a lot of really great information here that could be really useful if in the right hands. So let's get it in the right hands, shall we?
Here,
Thank you,
here.
everybody, for persevering today. I know it's a lot. I threw a lot at you, but this will inform the ongoing process and the next steps that Incremental Development Alliance will take you through. So we're not done. This isn't the last that we don't go away from here. We're
Right.
still here to work with you. So thanks for going on the journey with us, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Take care, everyone.